All right, welcome back to the Buzz with Dr. B on this terrific Tuesday. I am so excited about this particular episode of the Buzz tonight. Just want to welcome you, and before I forget about it, to say Happy Thanksgiving Day to everybody who's out there and who's listening to us on this evening. We're so excited to have you to share with us. I have with me tonight two very special guests who are very special to me. One of my good friends and mentors, and of course, my mentee. So what a way to be surrounded on this evening. Reverend Dr. Glenell Pruitt is with us. And it's just always a delight to be in her company. And I'm just so excited to have Miss Tylar Phillips tonight, who is sharing with us. And we are talking about intersectionality. The topic came about actually through a conversation. I don't know if Tyler remembers that we had this conversation some time ago about various intersections in life. And so as we're talking about it, I thought, why not introduce to you Reverend Dr. Glenell Pruitt, who I'm going to allow her to tell you some things about herself as we go on this evening. And as we talk this evening, you're going to hear a little bit more about her. And of course, she is the pastor of the St. Matthew AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church, right here in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I reside. And in the 8 years, I think it's been 8 years, Dr. Pruitt.
It has been.
It's been 8 years already. And in those 8 years, I'm just so grateful to have a friend in ministry who is as passionate about the community as am I. And so I remember the first time upon meeting her, it was because I was so super excited that there was someone in the city who was doing something to affect positive change. The St. Matthew AME Church has been known for its work in the community, helping the homeless in our community, also just being such a blessing in setting up seminars and various things just to guide us and where we should be. And so she is also serving there at Jarvis Christian College, which she will tell you more about as we get into things. And I mean, just a wonderful resume of things I want her to talk about, where she has served in higher education, of course, as in social work, just so many intersections. And that's why I don't want to tell too much about her, because there are some intersections that are there that I want her to talk about. And Miss Tylar Phillips, I'm excited to introduce to you tonight. I always say that she's my young grasshopper. She's up and she's coming. And I'm telling you, I have learned so much, and what a great responsibility that the Lord has given me. And working with this young lady, because she has actually taught me so much and kept me on my toes. And so, like I talked to you earlier about, we started having this conversation based on some things that Tyler and I started to discuss. And so that's where we are tonight. We're talking about intersections. So go grab the family, sit them around the table, pull them to the couch, wherever you are. If you're in the kitchen, let's have this conversation about where we intersect in life. While I feel like this is a conversation that we can have among both men and women, I thought that we would start with intersectional feminism tonight, and that representation, of course, being here with our panelists, who I feel like are experts in their own right. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pruitt at this time. Reverend Dr. Glenell Pruitt, why don't you say hello to all the people who are tuning in and listening on this evening?
Well, hello, everyone. And I want to begin by thanking my beautiful colleague, my sorority sister, my friend, for inviting me. I have participated, or at least I have tuned in, and I was so excited when you called to ask me to be a part of this. So thank you so very much. I'm excited to be here.
It's so good to have you to be here, and just tell us a little bit about what you do there at Jarvis Christian College.
Okay, at Jarvis Christian College, I serve as the provost and vice president for academic affairs. So I guess if I want to put it in simpler terms, I'm responsible for making sure that students who pay their money to go to Jarvis Christian College receive a quality educational experience at Jarvis. And that's my responsibility.
Wow, much work to be done. And of course, I just love your doctorate is in social work, is that right?
My doctorate is in social work, yes. As a matter of fact, my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate
are all in social work.
Right. So I knew I wanted to be a social worker, right?
Wow. Absolutely, no doubt.
Right, 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 right. Yeah,
And you have a master's of divinity also. So
I
you've
do.
got two master's degrees. Am I right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
talk about intersection. Talk,
Yep, yep, yep. You're right.
talk
You're
about an
right.
intersection for sure. Miss Tylar Phillips, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You have an extensive resume already. I don't know what you're going to do. And tell us, and you know, it's always taboo to ask a lady how old she is, but I want you to tell your age. Dr. Pruitt and I won't tell our age, but you tell, look at Dr. Pruitt. Dr. Pruitt's like, no way. But you go ahead and tell us your age.
I am 22. Hi, Dr. Pruitt. I didn't know you were a soror. Nice to meet you, soror. Yeah, I'm 22 and I'm a graduate student at the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, studying public administration with a concentration in local government. So I'll be done next summer.
You'll be done next summer. Now, you tell us where you attended college.
I went to Wiley College.
Of
I
course.
graduated, of course. I graduated in the fall, in May 2019. I'm thinking about fall. My anniversary was last week. So yeah, I graduated from Wiley College in May 2019.
May 2019. And so what are you doing now? Tell us a little bit about what your passion is. Again, we started this conversation just by you and I having lunch, I think one Sunday after church. So tell us a little bit about what your interests are, because like I said, you have a pretty extensive resume for a 22-year-old. And I was very pointed in that. You're 22 years old. And I absolutely love that. One of the things that you talk about is that when you do something, you do it from the place of a need. You're always trying to meet a need. And I have definitely loved that passion and that drive that's in you. So tell us a little bit about those things that you like to do for a 22-year-old.
Yeah, so pretty much all of my hobbies include figuring out something about myself and my community, learning something new, educating somewhere, somehow. And I kind of have made that like, it's a joy. I enjoy it. I enjoy working. I'm a people person. And I hear people say all the time, well, I'm not a people person. I don't like, no, I actually really like people. I like to talk. I like to know people. I like to know what you're doing in your life, like where you are in your life. What do you believe in? It doesn't have to be what I believe in, but I am interested in knowing like what shapes people and the types of decisions that they make. So I am currently working as an intern. Well, it's technically an internship, but I am a temporary staffer with Denton County. So I am just working through the election season. I also am an intern with Angela Rye's firm. It's called Impact Strategies. And so I do a lot of that stuff on the side, aside of being in grad school. So I am pretty much interested in, my bachelor's is in criminal justice. But I am kind of finding a passion towards education, not necessarily teaching, but just making sure that there's access to education. So in college, I actually was the national representative, Miss National United New York College Fund, 2018, 2019. And that came from fundraising. So it was a fundraising campaign organization. Well, the position is based on how much money you can raise. Who raises the most amount of money for each school will go to the conference that we have in February, at the beginning of February, the National Pre-Alumni Council and National Alumni Council and UNCF conference. And so then you'll compete against queens from other schools. And so much of what I've done has been making opportunities for other people. And I think that's because of how I grew up. I never missed anything. I never missed out on anything. And I think that I recognize that is a privilege. I think sometimes when we think about privilege, we think about wealth and money. That's not privilege. Privilege is just access to something that other people don't have. And so I have lived a very privileged life in terms of like what I was allowed to have a voice in my house, and a lot of people don't. So for a lot of growing up, I found myself being called insubordinate often, or I even got called aggressive in college, and I just thought that was wild because I was like, people still call Black women aggressive in 2019, but that was a thing. But I'm just at this place where I'm trying to piece together, or not piece together, but connect who I am, my identity to spirituality, my spirituality, and the rest of like the world, trying to unpack all of that and what that means. Like, what does it mean to be a Black woman who is womanist, who upholds like womanist theology or ideologies, feminist ideologies. There's kind of a slight difference, but who also identifies as Christian. And so that's just kind of where I've been since about, I mean, I've grown up Christian, so I've always been Christian, but it's been a spiritual journey for me. I went through like spiritual warfare my senior year, just like all these things that I grew up believing. When I got to college, you experience like liberation. You don't have to answer to anybody, and it's like, okay, but at what point do you pull yourself back in and say, okay, time out, I need to try this again, I need to figure something else out, because this is not me, I don't like this, I don't like where I am, I don't like how I feel. And that's kind of where I am, is figuring myself out so that I can help figure out the rest of the world. So
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I was listening to a devotion actually, and it was the story about the Good Samaritan, and it was talking. It's kind of a twist because he was Pastor Kevin Cosby, out of St. Stephen's Church, but he was talking about how the Good Samaritan had to have something to give to the guy that he found. Like, he put him on his trailer and took him back, like put him on. He traveled with him, but he had to have something to help him. Like, sometimes you want to have people, but we're not, or we want to have things and we want to help people, but we're not established. So then there's like this shaky road where we take on these responsibilities and we're not really sure if we're ready for it. And so that's kind of where I am, is trying to define like who I am, what it is that I want, and what is my contribution to this world. I think that we can all make this world better. By making ourselves better. And that's kind of the Christian journey. It's just waking up every day and trying to be better than I was yesterday. So sorry, that was long-winded.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm so glad I'm not 22 anymore.
Exactly. I was just about to say that. I'm so glad that I don't have that. Sometimes I wake up and I'm just kind of like, and it's funny because I'm double her age, so I just told everything about myself, but I don't have that. And so when I hear this, it makes me grateful for the journey that I've had. But what you talked about was, and I'm sure you see this, Dr. Pruitt, what you talked about, Tylar, is something that, and very strategic to have the generations here. Of course, that's where your generation is, and your generation is very intersected. So you're dealing with being in this particular generation, and also trying to figure out a lot of things. Where do I cross? And I'm female, I'm Christian. What does that mean? And then saying, what does that mean for me and not for my mother? What does it mean for me and not for my grandmother? Dr. Pruitt, you mentioned that you're fourth generation AME. And so I myself am a fourth generation Baptist preacher. And so, for me, I had to figure out what that looked like for me. I'm one of the first female pastors in my family. Well, probably the first female pastor, not the first female preacher, but the first female pastor in my family. And so I had to figure out what that was going to look like for me. So, how do you still love family? How do you still appreciate advice and still very much so be who you are? How do I be a woman and not be like every other woman? How do I be a woman and not be like every other woman that's in ministry? How do I be I'm African American and I'm a female. So I'm a professional. So there's lots of intersections. And of course, our listening audience, I'm sure there's people who are listening tonight who have so many things. And you talked about this, Tyler, how that we don't have to necessarily agree with things, but as Dr. Pruitt, as pastors, as Tylar, those who seek to work in the public and to help those who are in need, as not just a pastor, but as a social worker, as a healthcare provider, we have to put those biases. We have to know who we are in order to put the biases aside. So Dr. Pruitt, tell us, what does intersectionality mean to you as a social worker and then as a pastor?
Okay, well, let me begin by saying that I would dare say for most of us, we have seen intersectionality all of our lives. We did not have a name for it, but I don't know about you all, but my grandmother did it. She was a housekeeper, babysitter for other race people. But on Sunday, she was a stewardess in the church and a community worker, right? My mother, who worked as a cafeteria worker during the week, but she was the first lady because my daddy was a pastor on Sunday morning, right? And so we've seen it modeled for us for generations. We've seen, and I think for us, it's nice to have a word to put to it, but it really is a part of what we do. It's a part of our lives. We've always been able to be women in diverse roles at the same time, right? And so when I talk about what I do as a pastor, as a provost, and as a social worker, for me, it's just me doing what I do in these three different spheres. But when you really think about it, it's not very different because it's all addressing the needs of human beings. As a social worker, I'm addressing the needs of human beings. As a provost and vice president, I'm doing the same. And as a pastor, because at the end of the day, and I heard my young sister talking about making a difference. What am I going to do to make a difference? What am I going to do to impact my community? And every day, that's what I think all of us get up thinking about. For some people, what they do is a job. For me, it's impacting my community. And so when a student walks in my office and not doing well in class, when I'm going off on you, I'm going off on you because I'm dependent on you to help us keep this community in, moving forward. And so I think it's our responsibility to do that. And sometimes, and as you've heard me say, Reverend Dr. B, my sacred and my secular, they intersect so often because what I do as a clergy to care for people, to empower people is the same thing that I do, as a provost and as a social worker. One thing that I think I was really blessed with is that I had women modeling being a pastor, because in the AME church, we've ordained women for now over 100 years, right? And so I saw that it wasn't anything unusual for me to see a woman who was pastoring and who was preaching. But I do think that my role is to always remember when I'm preaching, and I heard Tylar say this as well when we talk about womanist theology, right? I think it's always important at that point of my intersectionality to help women see themselves in the scripture. And that does not always happen. Too often when we're, and I think that's just, I think that's why the Lord called me, Dr. B, to be able to empower women to see themselves, and that they were relevant then, that they're relevant now, and God has a plan, but you got to see yourself in it. But not just women, Black women have to see themselves in it.
I love that, because that brings me to Jeremiah 29:11, where it talks about how the Lord has a plan for us. And you said something very pointed that I don't want to leave. And that is that we have to see ourselves in that plan. And all too often, I believe that as African-American women, we do not see ourselves in the plan. So I agree with you, because like I said early on, and with me starting to pastor, it was just, I looked and I saw, hey, this is going to be happening over at St. Matthew AME. I had to be there that Saturday. I had to see that thing being modeled, and so it was just, so I know that God uses you in that light. I know that God uses you to help other women to see this is where you are in the text. This is where you are and not just in the text, but in the context of your own life.
Yes.
And what you are living in that context is where you need to be seen, so that you can operate totally and fully without compartmentalizing your life. You talked about something, Dr. Pruitt. You said that it was just given, and I believe that the history serves me right. The term was coined in about 1989 or so, intersectionality. And so it's a relatively new term. And what sparked me about it, and I'm like, this is not something that's new. This is something that has been going on, but I believe that there's a generation that feels like this is new. Now, I'll tell you why I believe the generation feels like it's new. For one reason, and something that hurts my heart, is we don't know our history. A lot of the time, there's a generation that has not connected to the history of the past that brought them to the place that they are, to be able to do the things that they are able to do and have the opportunities. Yeah, my grandmother also would be a first lady on Sunday, but yet this is the same woman who went to school with her daughter, her namesake, Charlotte. And she says, Charlotte, you're going to go to school. My Aunt Charlotte at the time gave birth to my cousin April. And she says, I'm not going to tell you, Charlotte, that you're going to finish school. I'm going to show you. I'm going back with you, and we're going to do this thing together. So my grandmother became not only the educator of her children in the home, the one who took care of home with her children, but she became a student with them. She was the first lady in the church. She had to hold her head up. She had to continue to go on. So those intersections, she was a Black woman. She couldn't change that. She was a woman. She couldn't change that. So these were things that she never thought about as compounding and being an issue. But I won't say that though that compounding is not something that we don't need to look at when it comes to equality. So I want to hear from both of you on that. Tylar, what do you have to say from the seat of your generation regarding those things?
I think that my generation is in a very interesting place. I think that it would serve us well to connect to our older generations, to our parents, and to our grandparents. Because when I think about the time that we're in, these radicalized protests, this push for more radical change, this criticism of like this exaggerated incremental change that like the government has been trying to push for years, people are like, no, we're not having it. My generation is very dismissive towards hostility, a lot of like hostility, especially in the workplace. Like when I talk amongst my friends, they're quick to like check their supervisor or check whoever they're working for. Like, this is what you're saying to me is not okay. And I think that what I'm trying to say is that we reject respectability politics a lot more. And I think that, but at the same time, I think there's a conversation amongst like my generation of like, oh, well, I wouldn't have done it this way. No, I think that, and that's why I think that conversations are important, that connections are important across like intergenerational conversations are important, because our parents and our grandparents upheld respectability politics and wore their hair, permed their hair, did what they had to do to get to where they needed to be. They needed professional jobs. They wanted, to grow into work into the middle class. They wanted to, you didn't see, after a while, you didn't see Black women on TV with like fros and dreadlocks. You weren't seeing that. You were seeing people with wigs and weave and like, all these things that were considered, all these styles and looks that were considered respectable, that were considered respectable by white people that we were trying to work for, because we didn't have, and it wasn't, there's a long history of, but I think that I wish that we were a lot more connected. I think that I have an advantage because I kind of grew up around older people. I grew up around my aunts, and I was always the youngest one. And I grew up around like my brother's friends. And so I was just always the youngest person. And I was always listening, and I was always asking questions. And so I was always asking for perspective. What was this like? Or how would you have responded to the situation? And I think that it's great that we're passionate, and I think it's great that we're rejecting all of these, problematic social norms, but I think that we do need a little bit more guidance. And I do wish that we not only could, I don't know, I just wish that there was a better connection. I think where we're going is right. I think it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, but I think that the type of change that we need, the type of policies that we're looking for, the type of governmental accountability that we're demanding is something that is super critical. And I think that we're at a place, because of our, because of our parents and our grandparents, because of all that they sacrifice, we're at a place where we're a little bit privileged in terms of like, how we can respond. Like I can go to work as a temporary staffer with my hair like this and not feel like, people definitely still make their comments and it's annoying. And it can be a little bit like awkward, but it's less often. You're seeing more people in professional spaces that are Black and are unapologetically Black and are, they're unafraid of like their features. I mean, yeah, social media is telling us one thing, but in the real professional world, I'm seeing more Black people with dreadlocks and more ladies who are wearing like their natural hair, their afros to work at the city of Dallas, at Denton County. Like I think that, I'm happy that that's where we're going. I just wish that there was a little bit more guidance for us, because there's also a disconnect between the church. And so a lot of people are kind of struggling with their identity. A lot of my friends are in the same place with their spirituality, but there's just so much that with social media and everything just at your face, there's so many distractions. Music, I was having a conversation earlier about like the music that we listen to and how really that like really influences the way we think about ourselves, the way we think about everything. Like it's one of the hardest parts, I think, about trying to change the way you live your life is letting go of the music you listen to. And I think that like we like the beats, we like the sounds, we like that things are like, it seems kind of uplifting, but it's like is this what I need right now? Is this where I'm trying to be right now? I guess is where I am.
Let me say this before we run away. You talked about respectability politics. And I don't want to get too far away from where Dr. Pruitt was going to go. So Dr. Pruitt, I may need to let you go before we get into the respectability politics there with your comment.
Yeah, and I wanted to say this as my sister was talking about the disconnect. Mm-hmm. And I think that even my generation, because I have a daughter who's 30, right, getting ready to turn 31, I think we too played a role in that disconnect. And let me tell you why. We decided that our children were going to go to schools where we otherwise could not go. They were going to institutions where their history was not being repeated. They didn't get it, right? But we did that because we believed that we had now an opportunity to do things differently than our parents, right? We often hear people say, some of the things my parents did, I'm just never gonna do that, right? Some of the things that our parents did, they were right. They were correct. And we see that now. As we're seeing all of these movements, Black Lives Matter, and those kind of movements, that's the civil rights movement. And to be perfectly honest with you, this has been going on ever since we were brought to this country. And every generation has an opportunity to say something to make it better, right? But the disconnect comes because young people sometimes feel that we who are the seniors, we're too quiet, we're too passive, we're not doing anything. But what we all need to consider is this. You go march in the street. I'm writing my congressman. I'm writing my congresswoman. They're gonna know who I am personally and that I am not pleased, right? And so there are different tactics used by different generations to try to get us all to the same end. But if we don't have those conversations, it's very easy for us to begin looking at each other very differently, and even with some suspect on what we're doing when we're all trying to get to the same place and to the same end where there is some measure of equality and equity for all of us.
Absolutely. And, I love this conversation simply because as we look at it, and you mentioned something, I'm so grateful that I allowed you to go before I would say what I was about to say. I really respect those comments. from both of you. Tyler, of course, talked about respectability politics. There's someone who's intelligent. There's someone who's gone about their job and has done well in their job, who may be a part of even my generation, who's saying, what in the world is respectability politics? And it doesn't mean that they don't have a clue, but there are so many things that this generation has coined that have already been going on. And if we don't have the conversations like Tyler has spoken to, if we don't have those conversations, we don't even know that we're speaking the same thing. The scripture says, let us speak the same thing and let there be no divisions among us. But you'll start to question yourself. You'll start to be suspect, like Reverend Dr. Pruitt said, you'll start to be suspect of the person that is supposed to be taking the journey with to get to the same place. We need those methodologies that come from different places. And then we have to understand what we have to lose and what we need to maintain on our way to getting there. Somebody's got to have bread. Somebody's got to have the money to fund it. So we all can't leave our job today and go out to the street and start to get out there. But one thing we cannot have, and that is we cannot have such a difference between us about what the main goal and where that destination lies. We have to keep forward where we're headed. So Tyler, I want you to talk and very briefly tell us what respectability politics means to you, because I think sometimes we're having these conversations, and although it's just like preaching, when you preach, you got to make sure that although you know what you're talking about, that audience who's listening to you actually knows what that is. And that's why we're having this conversation tonight, because people don't understand intersectionality. They don't understand. I was in a session the other day where I said PWI. And I remember when I didn't know what PWI meant, and not too long ago, I was like, oh, you just mean someplace like this where Black and white folks go to school, or predominantly white folks go to school. But now there's a coin, everything's now acronyms with young people, so PWIs. So tell us about respectability politics so that our listening audience understands what that means.
To me, there are a lot of different, I guess, responses, but I think that because there are a lot of different ideas about what that looks like. And I think for me, it's the sacrifice that you make to your identity to get to where you need to be. And that's honestly just how I see it, and I think even when we talk, because a lot of my generation is very critical of like Michelle and Barack Obama, and the way that they respond to things. And I think, and the way that they've conducted business, I think, and I had a conversation with my friend who has a podcast, and we were talking about Barack Obama and soon to be Vice President Kamala Harris. And we were talking about, all of the things that you have to sacrifice as the only Black person in white spaces. And I think that a lot of our generation, because so many Black people have like moved to the suburbs, you're seeing more after white flight. A lot of white people ended up going to school with like just white people because they were living in suburbs, and a lot of Black people were still living like in inner cities, and so they were going to inner city schools. But now we're seeing more Black people move out to the suburbs. We're making more money. We're able to afford bigger houses, and so we're privileged a little bit because white kids like our music now. They like our hairstyles, and so whereas people are still getting kicked out of school for dreadlocks in Texas, young men are still getting kicked out of school, not allowed to graduate for dreadlocks. Cheerleaders are wanting to wear braids. I was braiding my white cheerleader friend's hair when I was a senior in school. So all that to say that respectability politics is the idea that a lot of people, like a lot of Black people and people of color, have had to adopt, of sacrificing and compromising pieces of who they are that are not yet accepted by society. That, the way that we wear our hair, the way that we code switch is literally changing the way that you speak when you go into work. The way that I come home and talk, I love coming home and talking like slang to my cousins. My cousin is my roommate. Because at work, I don't do that. I feel like they're not going to, although, you know, they all know that I'm in grad school, they're not going to take me serious or have much respect for me if I am as relaxed as I would like to be. And so that's code switching is still respectability politics. That's still changing who you are, things about yourself to be accepted, or to be accepted within a space, any type of space. That could be a professional space, an education space, an educational space. So that's what I mean. I think that a lot of my generation is very critical about how our parents have adopted respectability politics, and I think that it was necessary. I think that you had to do what you had to do to get to where you wanted to be. We sacrifice things all the time. I think that we are just super critical because they sacrifice in a way that a lot of us are not willing to. I'm not willing to take my dreads down so that I can find a job. I'm just going to find another job that's going to be accepting of my dreads at this point. But, you know, I remember like when I was first considering dreads, my mom was like, are people going to hire you? Like, you're wanting to work for the government. You're wanting to work public service. And I'm like, do they want these credentials or do they want a perm? Because it's one of them you're not going to get. You're not going to get my service or what I can contribute if you're expecting a perm, because I'm just not doing it. So I hope that
that helps. But what the thing I want to know from your generation is, do they understand? And I would say that we still have a long way to go as African American people. And you helped me, Dr. Pruitt, on this. I think we still have a long way to go as African American people to even be said, for it even to be said that we're privileged. In any way, because anywhere that we're going, we still have problems. And of course, Ahmaud Arbery's life shows us that even in the suburbs, we still aren't just there. I do think that there are a group of people who see our gifts. They see how we sing our blues. They see how we do our jazz, and they will welcome our music into their homes before they welcome us ourselves. But I think what your generation has to understand is not so much of a compromise as it is that these are the things that are going to pave the way for you to be able to say that, you know what, I'm not getting a relaxer in my hair. I am going to wear my dreads. Had not they done some of those things that they did to get into the door, to change those policies, to make sure that the systematic problems that were going on and still do go on in organizations, we have to get to a place for those things to be able to speak truth to power. And sometimes it takes you getting a little closer to the ear of the person in charge. You just can't do that from the bottom floor. So sometimes it's you getting in on the first floor and moving your way up in that organization. But it's interesting to hear these points of views, because if we never take the time to have the conversation and to understand what the thought process is, and parents, I want you to understand that your child could be in your home thinking something very different from what you think they think. Just because you're the parent in the home, they could be thinking something very different. And that's why we're having this conversation. Dr. Pruitt, what do you have to say about that?
You know, I was sitting here and I'm listening because this is also intriguing to me. And especially as we talk about, you know, how we are bilingual in a sense. That's what we say. You know, we talk one way at work, but we talk another way when we get around, you know, people who we're comfortable with. But you know what? Respectability, politics, whatever we want to call it, our parents called it speaking properly.
Mm-hmm.
Our parents said to us, and I remember my mother, who had an 8th grade education, when my subjects and verbs did not agree, she would correct me. She only went to the 8th grade because that's as high as Black folk went at that time when she was in school. But she knew how to conjugate. She knew how to do everything that was necessary. And it wasn't because they wanted us to talk like we're white. They wanted us to speak correctly. They wanted people to understand when they heard us talk that they had educated people who they were interacting with. As we talk about former President Barack Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, when we talk about Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, I know people have a whole lot of thoughts about them, their politics, but at the end of the day, this is what I say to everybody. Why can't we just be who we are in the space we're in without having to be who you want us to be? At the end of the day, whatever problem you have with President Barack Obama, he was president. Hadn't been but 45. He was one of them. So whatever the groundwork was laid for, and those of us who are Christians especially, we always say what God has for me is for me. So do we not think that God did not have a plan for President Obama's life? Right? And so we knew his background when he was elected. He did not come the tradition. He wasn't raised in Shreveport, Louisiana. He didn't go to Booker T. Washington High School. His experience were different, and therefore he brought who he was, into that space. And I think sometimes we can be so difficult and so hard on each other because of the expectations we have. And instead of us building on what they've done, we began to, slowly erode what they've done. And I just, and for me, I just have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm. I think before we move on, I want to say these are not necessarily my feelings. These are just like popular conversations amongst my generation. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why I said the way that I framed respectability politics is, I think that it was a strategy. I think that you do what you got to, like I was saying, you do what you have to do to get to where you want to be. Right. And I just think that not even compromising, but sacrificing pieces of yourself was just a strategy, like you were saying, so to get, or one of you ladies was saying that, you can't, you have to get into a place where you can whisper in the ear of your boss. If you don't have any strategy to get to where you want to be, and you're kind of just doing stuff, making people mad everywhere you go, you're not going to make any changes. What you're going to do, it's going to be counterproductive. All the energy that you're investing is counterproductive if you're stepping on toes everywhere you go. So I do want to say that just because, I'm bringing these things up, these are popular conversations and comments amongst my generation, but these are not necessarily things that I agree with.
True. And absolutely. I think when we look at the movie, The Butler, it brings this to life for us. When you start to look at the butler, you see the father and you see the son, who both of them are all about what needs to happen. But the son thinks that, Dad, you're sacrificing your life. But, there were some things that his father was able to hear because he was in the White House and he was working. And there was some protections that were given because they were in the White House. There were some truths that wouldn't have otherwise gotten to the ear or to the heart of that president had not he seen how this man comes to work every day. And he sees this African-American who wants to take care of his family. And he's doing these things. And, but his son is an activist out there doing what needs to be done. So we have to have these conversations because, like I said, in our homes, we have this situation happening right now. We talk about white spaces. Very good point, Tylar, to bring up those white spaces. When will we allow those white spaces? When will we start to take ownership of those white spaces? And I think we attribute so much to someone else that we don't forget that we can have an ownership in it without anybody's permission. And there are some places that we should be able to do so. And of course, we're not allowed to do it. And so we've got to fight for it. So I think by the time that you have made it to the White House and you are the 44th president of the United States of America, you own the space. It's not a white space. We have to start, although we have been conditioned to see it as a white space. When are we going to change our mind? When are we going to let the narrative change for us? Of course, you all brought up President Kamala Harris. And if there ever was a couple of intersections in the world, great points, because we see President Barack Obama is definitely in and of himself intersected. We see, I know we talk about it as much as about feminism, but he is an intersection. He has a Caucasian mother, a Black father. He, you know, he's a Black man, and which amazes me how so many people wanted to split him into compartments. But it was said that if you had a drop of Black blood, you were Black. So he's a Black. Right. We didn't make that. We didn't even make that up for ourselves. So he was a Black man. He was educated. You know, when he ran for president, so many people thought you're crazy for running for president. You don't have enough behind you in politics. Then we see this with the same thing with Vice President elect Kamala Harris. She's intersected. And I mean, look at her mother. Her mother's Indian. Her father is Jamaican. And then, you know, she's female. She's gone to the HBCU and all these things. So I think we have to start at some point owning the space. I think sometimes we have to just start to own the space. So what do the two of you have to say about that and owning those spaces? Once we step into them, we've got to change our mind, and we've got to be forgiving. We've got to give each other a chance. And Tyler, thank you for bringing those points up, because I am grateful for the Stacey Abrams who wears her hair natural. Because to be honest with you, it's not because you decided that you can go to work with dreads, but it's because Stacey Abrams has made it to a point where she could. I'll tell this story and then I'll turn it over. I was there in Galveston on an internship one summer, and I walked into the ER, and this is why conversations between God's people are very important. I walked into the ER to do ER duty one night, and I was shadowing doctors and I was shadowing nurses that night. And one particular nurse said to me, he was like, I was like, oh, wow. He's like, I looked, and his earlobe was so big that he had a triangle of earrings in his earlobe. He had this, he was taking his Harley cap off. He had, he was taking his helmet off, and he put a hat on, a cap on that had a Harley sign going down the side. And he had a long ponytail with about 3 rings of rubber bands on it, right? And so he looks at us and he says to us, he says, he's like, you won't have to do too much. It's what he said to me. He said, you won't have to do too much. He said, if I had to bring you into medical school, I would bring you in today. I just about wore my hair pulled back all the time whenever I was going to go into a professional setting. I wore my hair pulled back into a bun, and I always, that's just the way what I did in professional settings. But he looked at those other students who were there, and he said to them, there were the smartest guys in my internship. He said to them, they look like little skateboarder kids, but they were brilliant. He said to them, he says, unfortunately, even when you go for your mock interview, you need to cut your hair. And they were just like, no, I'm not cutting my hair. I am smart. I am who I am. And of course, this was about 20 years ago, but he told them, he says, if you're going to have success right now, you're going to have to cut your hair for the mock interview. We're not even talking, he's like, because the mock interview is your first impression. And that's going to determine if you come back for an interview. And these guys cut their hair. They went shopping and they put suits on for our mock interviews. They were suited up. They cut their hair back, did everything that they needed. They were pristine for the interview, the mock interviews that we had. Every last one of them got into medical school. But here's the deal. This is the lesson that we learned from that gentleman. He was a white man. And he said, when I got out of nursing school, and you know, everybody knew that I was competent as a nurse, I started bringing in who I am. He's like, but that's what I had to do in order to become a nurse, because they had what I wanted. And that has always stuck with me. And I think God allowed it to be a white man to show me just how much the more I had to do at that time to be able to get into the door. And what he was saying, once you're in, you can do whatever you please. You can set the standard for something else. And I believe that's what Stacey Abrams has done. I believe that Stacey Abrams has gotten into a position and a posture. And I'm sure that there are African-American people who don't like how proper she is in her language, but they need her there. And I think we have to start to think about needing people to be in those spaces so that we can and get into those spaces and be what we need to be. So Dr. Pruitt, take it from here.
Yes, and as you were talking, I was thinking that so often we find ourselves in spaces where there's no one else that looks like us.
Mm-hmm.
They're not our gender, neither are they our color.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to make sure that we always do is be our authentic selves. I have always thought that if I'm in a room with all white men, it's purposeful.
Wow.
And so it's purposeful. I'm there for a purpose, and I'm not there for me. I'm there for a purpose. That's the way I always see it. And so I always make sure I'm listening, because more times than not, I have some educating to do of those folk in the room. That's why I'm there, because they're going to say something inappropriate. But for them, they're just talking, right? They're just being themselves. But I always think that I think that whatever space we go into, when we walk into the room, it is ours. The problem is we don't claim it.
We've got to claim it.
We don't claim it. I
don't.
think that whenever we walk into a white space, it's ours.
Mm-hmm.
And we're there for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we start understanding that if you're in that place at that time, then you're there for a purpose, realize what your purpose is and stand firm in whatever that is. But I think too often, sometimes we think we are privileged to be in that space. But when we go into that space, we got all the ancestors and we got all our young sisters and brothers who are in that space with us in a spiritual realm, who are dependent on us to do some educating, and to not only that, but to kick a door open so that they can come in that space as well. Because too often when we get in that space, we're the only ones, we just want to be in that space by ourselves. And I just don't think that's the purpose of us being in that space.
And I think that's what Tyler's generation is talking about, is that we have a part of what I hear from that generation myself, is that we have to learn how to kick that back door open. There has not been anything in ministry that I have ever felt uncomfortable that I could not talk to you about. We even talked about, and we still have to have this discussion about transgender Black people, because we know that transgender Black people are being killed in America for being who they are. And then that's a whole different discussion about the church. And I think that's why this generation with Tylar is struggling, because they have not seen us love. They have not seen us be authentic. They have not seen us embrace what doesn't look like us, so that we can help and do what needs to be done. We've got to kick that door open. We've got to invite people in and let them be a part of what is happening. Be authentic in everything. And authenticity doesn't mean that we've got to, I think it doesn't mean that I've got to relate with my homeboy or my homegirl at that time. I think my authenticity is, look, this is why I'm in the room and this is what's going on. I can tell you that in the position that I'm paid for, I am not paid the same amount as the men who do the same job that I do. And I promise you, I do more of the work. I do more work than those men do. So that equity is not there. But I promise, when I walk in the room, I'm there for the sister who is coming behind me. That's right. I do what's necessary for me. I'm there for her, that when she gets there, they will know what that looks like. If nothing else, they will hear my voice, and they will know that for her, that she will begin better than what I ended. And I think we have to do that. And that has to be something that going forward, we have to understand. We don't need the permissions. And I think a lot of times we're looking for permissions. And Tyler, you talked about your mother saying, well, don't you think you want to do this or do that? That comes from us being conditioned that we need the permission. And of course, we have to, I don't know how many times we have to have a divorce in that area, but we have to divorce those thoughts. And so we need that generation to be patient with us while we divorce those thoughts, because your mother is not much older than I am at all. She's just a few years older than I am. But we find ourselves having to constantly divorce those thoughts and to stop posturing, to sit up straight and to say, I do belong here. It's not by happenstance that I am here, but my ancestors paved the way for me to be here. And God gave them what they needed to chisel that way so that I can stand comfortably here today. I will be comfortable with being uncomfortable in this place. I will not bend my back. As Dr. King says, I will not let anybody ride my back, but I will be who I need to be today. So Tyler, tell us a little bit. I know you're right there in the middle of a tornado, so
yeah, it's getting kind of loud out here, so sorry about that. The sirens have gone off, but it's raining really, the sirens were really bad, so I kept myself on mute. I did want to say that I think the only reason that we're feeling a little bit more rebellious about the way that we present ourselves in society is because that there are more Black people in the spaces that we're in. There are more people of color in the spaces that we're in. And so I think that what you were saying about permission, we feel a little bit more like it's still, I think when you're young, I think especially for me, I'm still trying to figure out what is the best way to say, what is the best way to say the right thing? What is the best way to, to just do anything. Everything is so critical. And so I think, I just feel like I like what you were saying, Dr. Pruitt, about feeling comfortable when you show up in spaces and owning the space and commanding and demanding the room. I think that, and when I talk about privilege, I mean like access, that I mean exactly that, like access that others haven't had. So I think that when I go into like my grad classes, there are not a lot of people who are like, especially Black people, there are not a lot of Black people, first of all, in the program, but then they don't speak up. I came from a HBCU, and we talked about everything, and I was very engaged in class. And so I think it's not even that people, can't keep up with the school. I think that they're not comfortable. I think a lot of my classmates are not comfortable. And I think that's because going to a PWI, which I'm learning now, you do come across people, the things that we hear about in movies and we see about on TV shows about people who challenge everything about who you are. They will challenge your confidence. They will challenge, if you're confident and you're, you have self-assurance and you feel like what you're saying, you know that what you're saying is true. You know that what you have, support for what you're talking about. People will still try to challenge everything that you say. This just happened. I was calling my mom and was super frustrated this past weekend because I had a major project coming up and I had to submit my topic. And I was telling my professor that I found this data, and it's a statistics class. So we were looking at huge data sets. And I was like, hey, I found this data. It shows me this. And he was like, it doesn't, I don't believe that that's what that is. And I was like, yeah, I'll save it to you. I'm driving right now, but when I get back to my laptop, I'll send it to you. He was like, it doesn't exist. I was like, what? Like, instead of you just saying, I'll wait until you send me what you have so that I can see, he was just like, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, period. That's what he kept saying. It doesn't exist. So I didn't respond. I stopped responding because I was driving, of course. And 30 minutes later, he texts me back, oh, I found it. So I'm sure if I found it on this website, what you have is credible. Duh. All you had to do was wait for me to send you what I told you I had. But he felt like, who am I to say that I found this data that he has never heard of, that answers this problem, this huge problem that he hasn't heard of? And it's like, that's common. That's common in for especially Black women in spaces, because a lot of people think that, or they'll assume that your education is, especially if you come from an HBCU, is less than, or that it's watered down, or that you kind of just got your degree. The same kind of attitude that a lot of non-Black people had towards affirmative action. Oh, you're only here because we needed Black people at the school. People feel like, oh, you only got that degree because you went to HBCU. Oh, your GPA was only higher to HBCU because the standards are low. No, my GPA was high at my HBCU because I worked very hard. My GPA is high here because I worked very hard. And it is discouraging. So I think a lot of people, it's very discouraging when people talk to you like that, when people challenge everything that you have to say because you're of just who you are. It's not even that it's not that you even disagree with me. you just want to shut me down because you are offended by my confidence. And that's what happens a lot of times for Black women in white spaces. Brittany Cooper, who is a professor, I forgot which school she taught, she's a professor at, but it's, she has a book called Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower. And she kind of talks about the struggles of Black women in these white spaces, in these academic spaces. She went to Howard, but then she went to a PWI and she's teaching at a PWI. And so when you have the audacity to speak up about something or to contribute to the conversation, people automatically assume that what you're saying is something that you just made up because you didn't have the resources. Oh, you didn't have those articles, so I know you didn't read that. I know you couldn't think of that for yourself. And it's like, that's why we're looking for permission, because at every corner, someone's telling us that what we're saying isn't real. Or that, and I think that's something that I think that's something that comes with maturity. When you become confident in your identity, when you've established and become comfortable with your identity, who you are and how you want to show up in this world, and you know that your education is legitimate, and all these books and things that you've read are legitimate. The things that people say, you'll understand and it won't bother you as much. But I think these are very important conversations. I think I'm grateful for this conversation, and I feel like I wish that Dr. Pruitt, you talked about this a little bit earlier when you were talking about identity. I think that the more we ask ourselves these questions about who we are and how we want to show up, and what does it mean to be a Black woman? What does it mean to be Black in America? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a Black woman? I'm sorry, I kind of just went off on a tangent, but yeah, I kind of explain like why a lot of people are super hesitant about, or why they don't really feel comfortable. So, I'm sorry.
Let me tell you what I think. And I think it's something that we really seriously need to consider. When you have been told a lie all your life about a certain group of people, and the proof of who they really are is right in front of you, it's hard for you to accept that people have lied to you forever, right? That people have said that they're inferior, they can't learn, they're not intelligent. And here you are with a Tylar Phillips, articulate as she could be, smart, verbose, personality. It's hard to do that. And let me tell you a second challenge. People of color are outnumbering other people. And when I've been a person in power simply because of my color, I have now got to come to grips with the fact that I am the minority in the global sense. There are more people of color than there are any other people, right? Which means my power is now being threatened because we're producing these Tylar Phillips, right? Who and they're being groomed to run this country and run this world. And I don't know about you, I would be a little frightened, and I would try to be, I would try to intimidate you as much as I could, because what? I feel my power.
It worked a little bit my first semester. I was very discouraged, and I cried.
Right. But do you understand what I'm saying? There are a lot of dynamics that goes on with how we are treated as a people. And that's why we have to know who we are.
Right.
And whose we are, right? And why we are in the spaces we are in. Because people have been living a lie for most of their lives. Because they were told that.
And I think too, the way that we're framed when we look at history books, even in Texas, because Texas doesn't want to call people, I don't even like to call like my ancestors slaves. They were people who were enslaved, because they were people. They weren't just slaves. That wasn't what they did, was not who they were. They were people and they were enslaved, but they call them workers in Texas in our textbooks. Paul Hannah Jones is is a scholar. She has written the 1619 project that she published last. She won an award through the New York Times, and she was talking about how, you know, we need to change the way we talk about Black history in schools, because it establishes the basis for this inferiority complex. It makes us believe that we were brought to this country inferior, and the systems that kept us, I wouldn't even say we weren't inferior, but the systems that tried to make us believe that we were inferior are still alive and prosperous today. And so I think that sorry, the rain is really loud. It's kind of distracting. I think that it becomes a challenge to teach people, and try to encourage people to see themselves not as less than. I think a lot of us do see ourselves as inferior, and it's subconscious, which is why you're seeing people who we uplift, and the colorism conversation is another conversation as well. But we uplift these European standards of beauty because that's what we've been told is appropriate. That's what we've been told is pretty. That's what we've been shown. That's all that we see in magazines and on TV shows. So I think that we need to change the way that we talk to each other, the way that we talk to especially our kids now and the next generations. And I think we need to make it a deliberate effort to teach our kids and to teach our friends Black history, like true, authentic Black history, not the stuff that we're reading in Texas history books, because that's just not it. I'm sorry, we didn't migrate over here like Ben Carson said, and that's just not. And we weren't workers. We weren't getting paid. We weren't even indentured servants. They were they were beaten. Okay, and I think I don't know. That's kind of why I like vivid movies like 12 Years a Slave and Birth of a Nation. Are, you know, they hurt, but I like that they're accurate about what really happened. This is what you did. People cannot take ownership. People are unwilling to take ownership for. That's why we haven't gotten reparations. That's another conversation too. People are unwilling to take ownership for what happened because they don't like it. It's ugly. It hurts.
The problems, Tylar, is when you allow somebody to script your history for you. And so if we don't start to write that history ourselves and believe our own story as we tell our story, then how then are we going to do what you're saying? What you're saying makes practical sense, but those history books that you're talking about, we allowed somebody else to tell our story. And that's why we've got to get back to the conversations that you are so enjoying tonight, and we so enjoy. You give us hope, because I know I don't feel hopeless at my age, but there's, you know, at the same time, I've got sense enough to know that I will not be here forever. I am entering into a different group. I don't care what the law says about gender, class, and age. Once you're over the age of 40, you start to compete with people who are coming behind you, okay? That's just an honest truth. So we are happy to have someone like you. And I don't want you to leave without hearing what Reverend Dr. Pruitt said to you tonight. We are happy about our Tylar. You're talking about maybe some of the confusion that's there in your generation. You're talking about some of the things that you're wanting to get settled in and those things, but we are happy. We are grateful for VP-elect Kamala Harris and where she has made it. Oh, but we've got to kick that door open, and we need somebody coming through that door behind. And we're so happy that you're standing on the top step and you're saying, hey, I want to go through this door. But we have to have those conversations, because if we don't have these conversations, we don't know our story. For me, clinically, where I am in my mind as a healthcare professional who goes in, and I'm sandwiched. My department is housed between the COVID unit and the COVID step down area. And so we're in the clean area in between. And I think when I think about it, and as I sit there every day, I think about African American people right where I'm seated, because right here is, you know, these people and that people. And sometimes, you know, I have to be careful, because if I look that direction, those are just like the older people who have gone on. Those are just like the people who, you know, they can get better, but we got to help them to get better. We don't need y'all to go yet, because we need y'all to have this conversation, but we all got to come clean. We all got to come to the same place where we come to a place of agreement. And even with COVID, I'll say this, people have died with their story unheard. Not that it's been untold all the time, Dr. Pruitt. It's not that it's been untold all the time, Tyler. It's just been unheard. So when do we start to sit and hear those stories? When are we going to put those things down and get our history and start saying what our, you know, listening to what our grandmother said? You and I, Tyler, we share this, and I think Dr. Pruitt, I think you and I share. I think you shared that also. We are old souls, and we listen to what's been told to us. We hear the narratives, we know the history, but how many people could enter into this conversation tonight and say, oh, I can remember what my grandmother saying this. I sat at the feet of my grandmother. I said, I would go over and visit my great aunt, and I would sit there and I would listen to stories. And so there's things, and my sisters will say to me, how do you know these dates and times, and how do you know these things? It was because of the narrative. But there's a generation that's coming behind that needs me to put those things in writing, that needs me to leave the scrolls so that they can find them. And that's what you're talking about. But until we start to write our own story, then we're letting somebody else tell it. Therefore, those inferiority complexes are going to be there. I suffer sometimes with the conversation that has to happen that I shouldn't not have to have, that my white counterpart is probably not having. But I'm having a conversation as I enter a room, and I'm saying, sit up straight. You do belong here. I should not have to have these conversations with myself. I should not have been the first African-American born in 1976 to be the echo tech, the cardiac sonographer, the first Black cardiac sonographer in a local hospital. That I'm not, you know, some people say, well, aren't you proud? Not really. I'm wondering what took us so long to get here. I'm happy that I'm here, and I'm grateful that somebody else Black has come, but I mean, there's still work to do. So the joy that I could have, I don't have, because I'm saying, what took us so long to get here?
And that's the same with us being women pastors, right?
Right.
You know what? No, I'm not excited about being the first woman pastor or first woman this in the clergy. It should have been happening all along. If it couldn't happen in the Black church, where women have always been supportive, then my God, where could it happen, right? And so the same conversation that you talk are the conversations that you and I have to have in 2020 when someone talk about you the first woman something in the religious sphere.
But look at how long the Methodist Church has been allowing for women to come in and preach. But yet you got, and I'm going to say this because it needs to be said. I've got to go to DC. I've got to go to the Museum of African American History to see what I should hear. I've got to go there to see and go, wow.
So do you think we should change?
What I should hear.
We think we should change the conversation. I mean, you said this, right? But how do you think that we should change the way that we have these conversations about who we are as people? Because a lot of times we're clashing. Like at this point with my spirituality, I'm clashing with a lot of people who's academic. I think they're very smart. I trust what they have to say, but we don't believe in the same things. They don't see God the way that I see God. They don't see not even just religion, but like we're disconnected. So how do either one of you think that? How do we have these conversations? I'm told all the time I talk about stuff people don't want to hear. So from 20-year-olds, I talk about things people don't want to hear. I don't know how to change these conversations with my generation. I would like to. Now I'm seeing now that I've moved, that I've kind of expanded, like I'm meeting people all over. My friends are going through the same types of spiritual warfares, but that's just my circle. How do I change this how do we change this like in the status quo in general?
Before Dr. Pruitt speaks, I want to ask you, but we have to, I think it has to, it's so generalized because your generation has to tell us what that warfare is. You have to tell us what it is that you struggle with. Is it Jesus being God? What is it? So what is that? And then what does that mean for you? Because religion, and I think we want everybody to agree with us about religion when our relationship with God is personal. So that's something else. It's our relationship with God is not a fad. It's not something that I'm doing because everybody else is doing. So that personal place of a relationship with God, I think sometimes we're seeking for that personal relationship. It's like wanting to be married to your husband, but you are doing so through all of your friends. And the intimacy comes through your friends, and you just can't have an intimate marriage that way. I know some crazy things go on in our world today, but that is not marriage. So I think we need to identify what the struggle is with your generation, because I could think of a multiplicity of things that your generation is suffering with. I can tell you some things that maybe my father or my grandfather or my great grandfather did not address, that I address head on in ministry. I talk about in ministry because it would have been a taboo for them, those further removed, to maybe say something about. I don't think my grandfather in his day would have gone for a female preacher, let alone pastor. But my daddy, his namesake, was like, my daughter is called to preach. And if I got to lose every friend that I have, she's called to preach. So I think we have to know what that struggle is. Dr. Pruitt?
Yeah, and as I was listening to Tylar, you all, let me give you some assurance, sweetheart. You all are not the first generation struggling with religion and spirituality. I remember being a teenager and wondering, now what is this really all about, right? And so what I say that we have to do, we have to carve out safe spaces to have real conversations.
Yeah.
And we have to carve out safe spaces for young persons, older persons, whoever, to be able to verbalize their frustration without those of us who think we are mature in what we believe being offended by you not being certain. One thing that I often say, and we find this a lot in college, working with college students, right? God is bigger than any of the questions you may have. We limit God's response because of our limitations. Any question you have, any frustration, God is going, oh, is that it? Right? But unfortunately, the people that you're talking to are those of us who have our own limitations. And we are afraid that if we stretch who God is, that we lose ourselves in the midst of it. Okay? And so that's why we have conversations about, some people don't call God the Father. Right? They don't give God a gender. Some say Mother God, right? Some just say God the Creator, right? In a way to kind of stay in the middle of the road. Do you know that God can be all of that at one time? Oh, and older people understood that, because when we hear them pray, we hear them say, He's a mother
for the motherless.
For the motherless. Now, how is He a mother for the motherless and a father for the fatherless?
Yeah.
There's something wrong with that picture, right? But what we need to understand, and what we need to help you all understand, that God can be whatever we need God to be. You understand what I'm saying? So what we have to do, and we're going to challenge Dr. B to carve out safe spaces for some of us to come together and quietly listen to your frustrations. And I'm willing to bet you we've been there. We just don't talk about it. Right? Okay? We've been there. We just don't talk about it because we are different in our generations, right? We don't talk about everything that concerns us, but we've been there. And so I think if we start carving out those spaces, I have loved this conversation with you. I'm telling you, honey, I'm satisfied the world gonna be all right because it has you in it.
Well, thank you. It's only like that because I've had people like you. I told you, I've grown up around my aunts. I've grown up around y'all's generation.
Yeah.
And I think too, one of the things I learned how to pray this summer and ask for the spirit of revelation, so that God, I can understand what it is that God needs me, because I want to find God. I don't want God to have to find me. I don't want to be out here and God something really, really, really bad to happen for me to be like, oh, that's what I want to just be drawn. But I want to, in the moment, like we get so frustrated. It doesn't even have to be in the moment. On God's, I just want to be able to hear what it is that that I'm needing to learn, or that I'm needing to do. I'm challenging myself, even in the moment when you get tired. I have a really bad anger in the moment, just being like, you know what, I prayed about grace. I talk about grace and mercy with you, Sorbir, all the time. Mm-hmm. What is that? That is in the when someone has made me the most mad in the world, and just being like, I can't, don't respond. I can't respond. You need to wait, and then you need to try to understand that person, understand why they said it, why they responded the way that they did. But I think we struggle with not knowing. I just think we don't know enough about the Bible. I don't think we know enough scripture. I don't think that, because I think the more scripture we learn, the more scripture I've learned, the more I've understood the Bible. I'm sorry, I'm not a pastor, so I'll let y'all speak on
Let me say this to you. And we need to have these safe spaces. And of course, I've been challenged by Reverend Dr. Pruitt to make sure that we create these. And we're going to figure out how to do it. I learned a little bit about Zoom rooms. So we're going to be figuring this thing out.
Right.
But let me say this. I think Dr. Pruitt said something about he's a mother to the motherless, a father to the fatherless. He's everything that we need him to be. I think your generation has to understand what helped me out. I am that I am. I am that I am really walked into my dorm room at Wiley College. At that time, my dad had been pastoring for a number of years, but I met I am that I am. I was going through, I didn't know what to call it. I remember calling my father one night and about 2:30 in the morning and saying, Daddy, I don't know what's going on with me. Dr. Ninjui has called me into his office and said that, I'm just not looking myself. And I was much like you, Tyler. I had this thing, and I knew I could, as a teenager, I would pray for people and people would be healed. But it had gotten so, college had really done its thing to me, so now, I'd been in the protection of mom and dad. So that anointing was okay. But when on my own, what do I do with this? How do I do it? I had to learn that night. My dad told me, he was like, I'm going back to bed. Whatever you need to do, you need to pray and go back to sleep, because I'm going to bed. I learned I am that I am. I learned that God will be who I need him to be, when I need him to be. Watch this, even when I don't even know what that is, even when I don't know who he is. You are very, you're very calculated. You're very, you're a planner. You work in the spirit of excellence. But when it comes to God, you got to be able to be free. You got to be willing to turn your will over. I'm a planner. I want things to go this way. But one thing that I've learned is a daily something I must do. It's not something that happens one time and you don't deal with it anymore. Each day you must give yourself over to God. What is your agenda for me for this day? And I think your generation has to learn that, to say, God, what is it? And to freely be available to him. There are a couple of reasons why your generation, and like Dr. Pruitt said, every generation has struggled with it at its level. I think your generation, my generation, Dr. Pruitt's generation, we have to understand what it is that maybe for them it was an 8-track, maybe for me it was an iPod. But we need to know what it is for your generation so that we can speak to it on that level. But I'm telling you, same God, the same yesterday and forever. That same God, he's got it. And the fact that you are addressing it tells me I'm with you. I'm with you, Reverend Dr. Pruitt. Everything's going to be okay for you, and we're going to be okay too. Because the fact that you are pondering these things and you're having these self conversations about our God and what He means to you, I think you're going to get it. Because what I discovered on the campus of Wiley College that particular night, when Daddy said, "You need to go back to bed, drink warm milk, or whatever you need to do, because I'm going back to sleep. You need to pray." What he did was not turn his back on me, but he turned me over to the capable one. And at that moment, I started having to see God and seek after God for myself and come to know Him for myself. It was it was no longer whether my grandmother agreed with how I felt about God, or if my daddy agreed with how I felt about God. It was me and God and my relationship that nobody, there's some things I don't know, but I may not know where you find this particular scripture, but I know the God who inspired that scripture to be written. And I think that's what your generation is dealing with.
Yeah. And I think you have to understand that God is a disruptor.
Yes.
He's a disruptor. And what we do, and there's a scripture that said what humans make their plans, but God would order our steps, right? And so what you have to do, if you are obsessive compulsive, that things have to be in a certain way, you will find yourself sometimes in conflict with God.
Yeah.
Because God disrupts everything that you have planned for, right? And another thing that I heard you say that I would recommend to you, find you some time and just be quiet. Too often we pray and we don't listen. Prayer is a conversation. That means what? We talk to God, but then we got to be quiet for God to do what? To talk to us. And if we find time to do that, that really strengthens our relationship with God. Because guess what? You know His voice when somebody at UNT have said something to really get you upset, right? And you hear a voice saying to you, "I got this. I got it. I got it." Which means what? You leave it alone. God's got it, right? And so I just think that if you all remember that God is a disruptor, that you need to find some time just to be quiet, to listen for and to God, right? And don't waste a lot of time like I did and some of us did trying to negotiate with God. Now, Lord, I tell you what, as soon as I get through with this degree, I'm gonna do what you say do. Just let me get through it. Let me do this now.
No, right? I learned my lesson. 2020 has been my lesson with that one.
Right. And so we waste a lot of our time trying to negotiate with God when God has it. He knows the will, He knows the way, He knows what we need. We just have to learn how to trust Him.
It's so true, because that negotiation is you're always going to find yourself losing. Before you've even began that battle, you have already lost. So that's a nugget of wisdom that I cannot express enough. How many times that I've tried to negotiate with God and He says, "Okay," and I'm pastoring now.
Right.
You know? So you find yourself doing exactly what God says do. God, I'll just teach the youth, and I'll go ahead. If you let me become a medical doctor, I'll teach the youth. I'll come on Wednesdays and I'll teach the youth. And He says, "Oh, really now?" So we just have to be mindful how we negotiate with God. And I think your generation is going to be just fine. I think what I would want your generation to hear tonight is that there are people who still relate to you. There are people who are very excited about the things that you guys are doing to make the change, and for us to know that that has already, the way that has been paved, it is going to continue to be a path toward a great future. Dr. Pruitt, you wrote an article, and I apologize that I don't remember, earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, and I think it was in the Shreveport Sun. Tell us a little bit before we close about that article and it was just kind of at the height of everything that was going on in our country at the time. I think it had been around the time where all these killings were happening, and Black people were just. Tell us a little bit about that article that you read.
Well, one morning, and I get up early in the morning. That's my meditation time, and I carve out that meditation space for myself. And it was during the time with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. You know, a lot was just going on. And I don't know about you all, but sometimes I feel so overwhelmed with what's going on in the nation as it relates to, African American young people and African Americans in general, right? And so I was sitting in my meditation space, and the Holy Spirit said, text the young men that you know, mm-hmm. and tell them that they are important, and tell them that they are valuable, and let them know what they mean in your life. And so I began to do that, right? I started texting people. I say, look, you're important, you're valuable, God loves you, I love you. And then that turned into an article that I felt compelled to write, to just talk about the despair I was feeling, the hopelessness I was feeling, but also the hopefulness that I was feeling, mm-hmm. and the importance of us sometimes just taking time out to say to each other, mm-hmm. I know what's going on in the world, but I want you to know that you're important to me. Mm-hmm. And I think so often we get so overwhelmed with the big picture that we lose those people who are close to us, and we don't say the things that we need to say to them. And so I wrote this article, and people were calling me about the article, but it was really, really a purging of myself as it relates to what was going on at that time. And I want to say this to Tylar, and I'm sure she's already in this space, but every morning I have a 16-year-old granddaughter, Tylar, and she's in the 10th grade, right? And so every morning I text her before she goes to school. And this is what I say to her. And I say this to you, and I say this to every young woman that I encounter. I say to her, good morning, be you, because you are enough. Mm-hmm. Be you, because you are enough. And I think we spend so much of our time trying to be what everybody else wants us to be, and that we don't realize that God has already put in us enough. And if we just be who we are, then I'm telling you, the world will be blessed. The world will be blessed.
Absolutely. I can concur with that, because I just believe that God gives us, when we think, and in this season that we're in, we think about the baby Jesus being born and those stages of life that Jesus had to go through before he got to those 3 years that we talk about in the Gospels, that we hear about in the Gospels. Our answer is already here. And that's what that's what I preach and teach. Now, I just don't know what God is doing with my answer right now. I don't, but I'm praying for that generation. And that article touched me so, because it made me think of when I read the article that you put out, Dr. Pruitt, I started to think about Moses. I could see that happening right now. I was like, she's speaking to the Moses. She's speaking to the Elijah who is thinking about running to that cave. She's speaking to those who are taking the courage to do what needs to be done. And it just blessed me to see that article come across, and to read it and to feel your heart at that time. I think that was part of the healing, the start for healing for me. It was actually, I would say that was the beginning of some healing, because you get into a space where what am I going to say to Tylar if I have this conversation with the nation having these types of things? What can I say to this generation? Can I say something right now? And I thank God with her, I've been able to say I'm angry right now. I've been able to be myself, and I try to do that and to be transparent whenever I am dealing with those whom I mentor. I'm angry right now. I can't give me some time to sort through this. Don't move right now, or to have that prophetic ear to hear what God is saying, so that they can, hear the voice of God. But I really believe that we have to tell our children that they are enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be deep. I think they just need to know that you are enough. And when you hear the story of, and of course I haven't read it yet. I have President Barack Obama's book, The Promised Land, um, and I've listened to Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and I think those who are struggling with their place in the White House, they need to hear their story. Um, and now to see that someone who looks like me is the VP elect, you know, that just tells me right there, I am enough. I am enough. And those people who are African American and who are struggling with that, we won't have that excuse in the next 4 years. We should not have that excuse that we're not enough. Now, whether someone recognizes that or not, not our business. We have to be about doing what we're supposed to be doing. So Tyler, I want you to give us some closing thoughts. Give us some closing thoughts tonight. And if there was something that you would have to say to your generation, or if it's something that you would say to generations before you, what would it be?
So I was thinking about this earlier today. And I was going to ask you probably. I was looking for some reassurance. I was thinking about the way that, because I see a lot of conversations about the legitimacy of the Bible, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to roll my eyes, but the legitimacy of the Bible. And I think that, a lot of people are, first of all, I don't take advice from people who are not saved, or people, I won't even say safe, but people who do not believe in Christ, who do not believe in God. I am personally not interested in taking any advice about how I should interpret the Bible. But I think that a lot of us are questioning. I think we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out when and where and how these things happen, instead of like picking out the lesson. Like, we read it. That's what I was saying. That's what I meant when I said we don't really know scripture, because we know, like, the famous verses, but we don't know the context. Like, everybody knows about Philippians. I just dropped it out of my mind, but it's talking when God is when they're talking, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. But I was listening to a devotion that talked about the whole book, like that whole chapter. And there's just so much more context than what we are allowing ourselves to hear. And I wish that we could stop looking for one verse, like Googling one verse, and try to join a devotion or a Bible study or something, so that we can have more context and be willing to ask questions. Because we're trying to find things on our own. And, I think that's the reason that we go to college. That's the reason that we go to grad school, is to learn and ask people who are, in their field. They're professionals in their field. And I think we need to do the same thing when it comes to the Bible. We need to be seeking more knowledge from people who, who do understand theology, who have, who are pastors. We need to be having more conversations with people. We need to I think we make a lot of excuses, and I'm saying this, and people are probably going to be like, what, whatever. But like, we find answers to everything else we want to find answers to. And I just really wish that more of my generation would look for mentorship, and tried, and I know that, mentors aren't just dropping from the sky, right? Because you need to be able to identify with that person in some way. But I think that we are not looking for Christian guidance the way we're looking for everything else. And I think that's where I wish that's the theme in my head when I'm saying I wish I knew the answers to these things. How can we do this? How can we do that? Everything comes back down to where we're seeking knowledge from. I just want more of us to ask questions from pastors. Like, stop asking other 21-year-olds who don't really know. It's good to have these conversations and talk about how you feel. but these people don't know. We don't know. We need to be asked. We need to be more reliant and dependent on other generations, and stop just thinking that they're disconnected because, you know, like you were saying, new terms have been coined, but the idea is the same. You understood what I was talking about, you know, and you were able to communicate it better to your audience than I was. You know, it's good that you know a term, but what does that mean? I think we need to get away from that. We need to understand that, like you were saying in the beginning, Dr. Pruitt, that there's nothing new under the sun. These same feeling, everything that we're experiencing now are things that we've experienced before, and we need to be intentional about the guidance that we are seeking, and the influence that we're seeking. So I would like to encourage everyone to, yes, we need accountability partners. Yes, you need people your age who are going to go to Bible study with you, or who you can, you know, have devotion with and talk about things like how does this apply to the real world? But like, you also need to try to have a relationship with a mentor or someone who is in the church, who knows the word, who preaches on the word, who talks about the word, the same way we rely on professors in academia. We ask professors questions that we can't figure out for ourselves. We rely on people who are specialized in their field to give us answers. And I think we need to do the same. I wish we would do the same.
I appreciate your comments. I do, for so many reasons. I can appreciate your comments. And I started to think, and my mind started to go about things that need to happen, that just conversations, Reverend Dr. Pruitt, that we probably need to draft and have with young people. And like she talked about earlier, Tyler, having those in a safe space, not something, not a panel to be argumentative, but to teach. I will tell you why I really like my friends in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I will tell you why I like those friends. I like those friends, and because I think what the AMEC has done has provided education in the area of religion that you won't even know that you're talking about religion per se. You will be talking about life. And I think, and I think for your generation has to know that, your generation has to know that we have researched, we're just not talking from our opinion. And I think Dr. Pruitt, sometimes we deal with that as, I know when I'm preaching and I'm teaching things, people are like, wow, wow. I'm talking about people who have had their name on the roll of the church for years. They're saying, I never knew that. So our presentation, and the way that we take our responsibility, I have a lot of opinions, but they don't belong in the pulpit. And I think when you start to deal with opinions, you're going to get the reciprocity for that. And so that's why we're getting a lot of opinions. Part of the reason why we're gaining a lot of opinions from young people, because we've given a lot of opinions. I think we need to be responsible for our behaviors. And I think that when people are hurt, we need to acknowledge that as the church. I think that, again, our behaviors, as much as I would like to say, I don't want people looking at me and expecting something of me. The reality is they do. And I'm called to live my life a certain way. So there are so many things. And I just want young people to know that you have a group of pastors, you have a group of preachers who are available to you to have these conversations, and not for argument's sake, but to hear what you have to say, that challenges us. Now, let me say this, I hope to get this, to produce a work that's going to be toward, that's going to speak to a lot of this. There are a lot of questions, a lot of a lot of topics, I should say, subject matter that we just haven't been comfortable to have. But like I told you earlier, when I started doing some research and I started figuring out and finding out how many transgender people were being killed and people being killed for having abortions and things like that, I knew I had a friend in Reverend Dr. Glenell Pruitt. I can say, look, this is something that we need to address, because we believe that when we stand before the Father, we're going to give an account for it. So we believe that you have a lot of young people who are struggling with identity, that the enemy wants that identity. What I'm here, that's the word that rings a lot with me when I'm hearing what you're saying, is this identity crisis that's coming across. He wants, you know, he wants you to identify with this and identify with that. But until we get back to being the church and looking like the church, and we allow the Holy Spirit to have his way, those who we serve are always going to be caught in that identity crisis. But you still have those pastors and those teachers who are here for the work, here for the people. I heard I guess I'm going to coin a new term as of 2020, and that term is going to be interwoven. But I heard that how God interwove Reverend Dr. Glenell Pruitt tonight, because I heard the social worker and I heard the pastor. And I think that we're going to have that platform again, so the social worker pastor can come back and talk to a group of young people, and we can have a setting where you can help us as someone that can be on that panel and have that discussion. Dr. Pruitt?
Look, I just want to, I want to say that at the end of the day, I think that some of the confusion and some of the concerns that our young people have is associated with some of the hypocrisy that they've seen in the institution
right
of the church. And because of that, they don't see it as authentic, right? And so what we have to do as a church is get back to loving folk. What we have to do as a church is getting back to being a safe harbor. When Black folk couldn't meet anywhere else,
they could meet at the church.
They could meet in the Black church. They could meet in the Black church. That's where protest movements were, in the Black church. But when the Black church began to assimilate and start looking like these other institutions, when we started getting that federal money, you know, we became 501c3, you know what I'm saying? And that meant that what? We had to curtail some of the things that we did in order to meet the requirements to get the federal funds. Then we began to push back from why we were in the neighborhood. We were a safe place. We were a safe place for gay people. We were a safe place for interracial people. We were a safe place for all kinds of people. But now we have such, it seems like we're so erudite that we have lost our footing in some situations, and we're not seen as authentic by millennials and other generations anymore. And I think that what this generation is asking us is just be real. They don't care if we don't know the answer. But when you say you don't know the answer and don't give me a wrong answer in order to save face, and I think so often what we find is that we find ourselves not being authentic, not telling you all about our fears, not telling you all about our concerns, not telling you all about our uncertainties, because we still have a lot of questions ourselves about this life, about God. We still have questions about God, whether you believe it or not. Because what? God is too big for our brains to even consume. God is so big. It's overwhelming sometimes when you think of how big God is. And when I hear people talking about big tents where they're bringing everyone in, that's who God is. God brings everyone in. And at the end of the day, that new commandment did not change. I command you to love one another. Let me do the other stuff. If you all just love one another, I'll handle the rest of it. And I think for some of us, we've forgotten that new commandment. That's all I have to say, my sister.
Thank you so much. Thank both of you so much. And I want to close out with that note that we've got to learn how to love again. And I just want to say to the unchurched and to the unsaved, and of course, um, I well, I am who I am,
That's
and
right.
so I'm intersected. I'm authentically me. So if you are unchurched, if you are unsaved, I just want you to know that that is what it takes. We love you right where you are, and oftentimes I think that people cannot distinguish between what is the world and what is the church because people have been hurt by the institution. And so we want you to know that we are here. We are standing. We're not perfect. And Dr. Pruitt, I've got to say this. You talked about how we can be vulnerable enough to say that we don't know. So we don't want to sell hope. We don't want anybody to think that and I think I've said to Tylar a couple of times, let me get back with you on something because I refuse to lie to her and to say, because I need to hear God on certain things. And I appreciate, I want to say to Tylar, I thank you so much because I think that God has allowed the relationship. And I thank God for your mother for sharing you with me because it's allowed me, Reverend Pruitt, to remain relevant to a generation because I have this individual who can say to me, these are some things that we need to discuss. These are some things we need to look into. And so it lets me know what's going on that I need to be speaking to a generation. And so I appreciate you being here and representing so well and giving us so much hope about what our future is going to look like. And so I applaud you and I thank God for you. Just so proud to have you. And of course, Reverend Dr. Glenell Pruitt, what can I say? Still on the front line. Everything that the work that you're doing there at Jarvis Christian College and have done at so many institutions of higher learning. And we just are so grateful. And we pray that the bishop will watch this episode and that the bishop will let you stay in Shreveport. Amen. And so I hope that the bishop is going to feel sorry for me and say that little girl need a friend in Shreveport. So I am so grateful. I am so grateful to, or we're just going to have to move the Grace Hill Church wherever you go next. And so I just thank God for you. And again, thank you all. And to our listening audience on this evening, I want to say to you, to our listening audience, thank you for being a part of what God is doing here with The Buzz with Dr. B. And in 2 weeks, join us again right here, 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And we're just excited to do this and to bring to you, of course, conversation from the hearts of people who care about their community. God bless you. God keep you.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice
Thanks.